All right, folks. Imagine like we like sitting somewhere casual, like for example, coffee on the table. No, like a lecture. No, like a whiteboard. Just like a conversation about something weirdly powerful about humans. The fact that like people decide, who you are before you like even really start talking, but not like in 10 minutes, not like in 5 minutes, usually in the first like a few seconds. And psychologist Nalini Ambady studied this in the 1990s, and the results honestly sound almost unfair. In one famous, for example, experiment that she showed students like a silent video clips of teachers, literally 2 seconds long. No like a sound, no like a lecture, just like a body language and like a facial expressions. And those students predicted with like a shocking accuracy how the like a teacher would be rated by their real students after an entire semester. Just 2 seconds, which means by the time like you say like your first clever sentence, and someone's brain has already started building a story about you. And confident or insecure, reliable or chaotic, someone worth listening to or someone who talks too much. In other words, in 2 seconds, you gotta be able to make a judgment about this person. And the strange thing is, most people try to win people over with information, like better arguments or like more explanations or longer messages. But the brain doesn't start with logic, it starts with signals, tiny signals. And once you understand a few of those signals, you start noticing something funny. A lot of social interactions are basically controlled by like small invisible switches. Let me give you one that almost nobody talks about, like for example speed of speech. And now here's like something you will start noticing once I say it. When people feel nervous, for example, they speed up, they start to mixing words, they're rushing, words start running over each other, and sentences get longer, explanations multiply. It is like the brain is saying, if I talk more, maybe they will believe me. But our brains interpret that signals differently. Like fast speech often reads as anxiety, and calm speech reads as control. Another, for example, Chris Voss, who's a former FBI hostage negotiator, talks about this in a way what is actually kind of funny. He calls it the late night like FM DJ voice. And those radio like hosts who speak at midnight, like a calm tone, like a slow rhythm, and almost like nothing in the world is urgent. And that voice has a psychological effect. It lowers that kind of tension in the other person's brain, and it signals that like the situation is safe. In other words, by the way how you're speaking, you're creating like a vibe, let's call it. And now you can imagine, like two people responding to the same question, and first person, let's say, saying, "Yeah, no problem. I will send like right now. Just give me a minute." And another person responding, for example, "Yes, I will send it in a few minutes." Like same promise, same action. But the second person sounds like someone who already has things under control. And here's the irony that people often speed up when they want to look competent, but slowing down slightly often makes you look far more confident. Not like dramatically slow. You don't want to sound like a philosophical turtle explaining life, like a Yoda from Star Wars. Just 10% slower than the other person. In other words, just a little bit, and that's enough. Because your brain is basically saying, I'm not rushed, I'm not pressured, I'm comfortable here. And comfort reads as authority. So now let's talk about another trick that feels almost like social magic once you notice it, which is called mirroring. Watch two close friends talking in a cafe, and after a few minutes, something strange starts happening. One leans forward, the other leans forward. One takes a sip of coffee, the other does too. And their speaking rhythm becomes similar. It is not planned. It is the brain quietly saying we're in a sync. In other words, you repeating the same shit with your like another partner or like a person who talking with you. You not like 100%, but you copying something, like in terms of maybe speed of speech, another body language, gestures. And social psychologists have studied this for decades. One famous set of experiments by Tanya Chartrand and John Bark in 1999 showed that when someone subtly mirrors another person's behavior, the other person tends to like them more without realizing why. And because subconsciously, when we see someone who acts like us, we subconsciously start to think that this person also like us in terms of like a mindset, behavior. This is sometimes called the chameleon effect, and we trust people who move like us, speak like us, react like us, and also I guess I can add look like us. In other words, this kind of mirroring super beneficial because again, subconsciously you saying like I'm like you can trust me, and that makes that person biased to you and trust you more. Now here's where it gets interesting. Professional negotiators use this deliberately but very subtly. Chris Voss teaches a simple verbal version of mirroring, and instead of repeating everything someone says, you repeat the last 2 or 3 important words they used. Like, for example, someone says, I'm not sure this solution will work for us. And instead of arguing immediately, you respond with curiosity. Work for you? In other words, instead of fighting, arguing, you want to clarify, and you're repeating the last or like the same few words. And now something fascinating happens. The brain of the other person automatically kind of continues explaining. Well, yeah, because the timing might be difficult for our team, and you mirror again the timing, and suddenly they are talking more, explaining more, revealing more information, and you didn't push, you didn't interrogate, you just repeated in order to clarify. And that makes the situation softer to deal with. You simply open the door for them to keep walking, and humans love walking through doors they opened themselves. In other words, instead of pushing them, you create a situation when they think that it's their choice. Which brings us to something extremely underrated in communication. The power of one precise question. Most people ask vague questions, and vague questions produce vague answers. How do you feel about it? I don't know, it's okay, and conversation is over. But a precise question acts like a spotlight. It forces the brain to reveal something specific. There is a technique investigators use, sometimes called the unexpected question. Instead of asking the obvious question, you ask something slightly sideways. Imagine someone says they're too busy to work with you, and most people respond with something like, okay, maybe later. But a more interesting question might be, what part of it feels most complicated right now? Now the person has to think, and the answer might reveal the real obstacle. Maybe it's time, maybe it's trust, maybe it's budget, maybe they just didn't understand what you meant. In other words, instead of directly asking what you want, you kind of asking diplomatic question, to make it softer, like showing that you care, to understand the reason behind it. And one placed question often reveals more truth than 10 explanations. And this connects to something deeper about human psychology. People trust those who appear curious about them, not those who try hardest to impress them. Think about the most charismatic people you ever met. They rarely dominate conversations. Instead, they ask questions that feel thoughtful. In other words, they show how important you are, active listening, and questions that show attention, questions that make you feel like your perspective matters. And it's subtle but powerful. And here's a slightly sarcastic observation about humans. We like people who like us. Shocking discovery, I know, but it's not about a fake flattery. It's about genuine curiosity. Another small signal people underestimate is silence. Most conversations today are allergic to silence. Someone asks a question, and if there's a 3-second pause, the other person jumps in to fill the space. But silence has an interesting psychological effect. It creates gravity. When someone answers a question and you pause for a moment before responding, the other person often continues speaking. They add details, clarify things, sometimes even reveal something they didn't plan to say. Yeah, this is actually called elicitation technique. When, for example, someone says something and you want to know more, and instead of asking a question, you just silent. And the thing is, again, that people don't like silence, and psychologically it makes the situation uncomfortable for them. So that person continues speaking in order to feel that silence. And by doing so, that person giving you more information, and you didn't do nothing, just because you know this technique. And investigators use this constantly. A person answers, the investigator stays quiet, and 3 seconds later the person continues talking. Silence makes people feel like the conversation is not finished yet. It is like leaving a sentence hanging in the air. And once you start noticing these like tiny signals, speech speed, like mirroring precise questions, like a strategic signs, you begin seeing conversations differently. And you realize like social interactions are not random. There's small psychological dances, like a tiny signals shaping perception. And the funny part is, you don't need to manipulate people or like play strange mind games. Most people of these tricks are simply about becoming more aware. Slow down your speech slightly, mirror people naturally, ask one thoughtful question instead of five rushed ones, leave a little silence in the air. Those things take almost no effort, but they completely change the first 5 seconds of interaction. The moment when the brain decides what kind of person you are. And once that first impression tilts in your favor, something interesting happens. People start giving you the benefit of the doubt. They listen more carefully. They trust you faster. And not because you convince them with like a brilliant arguments, but because the signals your brain sent in those first few seconds quietly said, this person seems solid. I hope it was interesting. Smash the like button, subscribe button, and see you next time.